This lecture will cover the stories of two very different men from antiquity, Oedipus and Jason. The story of Oedipus, the most famous play from antiquity, is the tragedy of a king who is merely trying to help his family and his people. That of Jason is going to be a quest of a hero and leader of the Argonauts to find the Golden Fleece, one of the most famous heroic stories from antiquity. Now, the story of Oedipus begins with the Thebans, that being this area on the Peloponnesus is the gateway to the south and is inhabited for 5,000 years. The greatest war in Greek legend happens here, aside from the Trojan War, and that is the War of the Seven against Thebes. Now, there are two founding myths for Thebes that we will discuss. The first is that when Europa is abducted, her father Agenor tells her brothers to search for her. They all give up except for Cadmus, who the Delphic oracle instructs to abandon his search and instead follow the cow to where it lay down and found the city of Thebes. Wishing to sacrifice a cow to Zeus or Athena, he sends his companions to the spring of Ares, where a nearby water source is found. However, none returned. He goes to see what happens, only to discover that this dragon has killed them. Cadmus then engages in a great dragon battle to kill it. This battle of Cadmus fighting the dragon is quite popular, especially around Thebes, as we have this great hero that will lead to the founding of the city, defeating a dragon just as so common in Greek myth, such as Zeus fighting Typhon. Athena instructs him to knock out the dragon's teeth and plow the ground under, sowing half of them. The other half he was to give to King Colchis. Immediately up sprang armed men, whom Cadmus threw stones among them. These brand new armed men, thinking they were being attacked, are going to battle one another until only 5 of them remain. These are known as the Sparti, or the sown men, those that are growing from the ground. They represent the ancestors of the 5 aristocratic families of Thebes, explaining why they were to rule. Now, Cadmus, in the foundation myth here, is going to engage in dragon combat, but the story comes from Mesopotamia and the dragon Marduk. And so this is going to show how they're also looking to Near Eastern sources for how Thebes was founded. Because Cadmus slayed Ares' dragon, he is then forced into 8 years of penance to make up for this transgression. Once he is purified of this miasma, he marries Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, whom are going to give him a splendid wedding. Aphrodite, for instance, gives him the necklace made by Hephaestus, her husband, and a royal robe that will curse all of the later generations of this union between Cadmus and Harmonia. All of their children, for instance, will be cursed. Ino, as we discussed, kills her children and then jumps off a cliff. Semele, the mother of Dionysus, is burned alive by Zeus. Agave is going to rip his son Penthus to bits, and then Actaeon will be devoured by hounds. In old age, Cadmus and Harmonia are changed into serpents and sent to the Elysian fields by Zeus to spare them a horrific death. And so in the end, they are blessed to be together. Again, in this case, tying the legend back into this type of dragon combat and serpents. So the dynastic succession of Cadmus and Harmonia ends here because all their children die horribly. Now the story thus continues elsewhere. The other branch of the family is what we will discuss next. This begins with Zeus taking the form of a satyr in order to seduce and rape Antiope, the daughter of Nycteus. The father is going to be shamed by the pregnancy of his daughter and drives her from Thebes. Antiope then takes refuge with the king of Sicyon. Nycteus commands his brother to avenge his family's honor, and then kills himself. Lycus, the uncle, mounts a campaign, after which they kill the king of Sicyon and took Antiope prisoner. She crawls into the bushes upon her return and gives birth to twins, Amphion and Zethus, who are found and raised by shepherds, much like we will see Romulus and Remus in the Roman myth will be. Antiope is then handed over to Dirce, Lycus's wife, and her aunt, who locks her in a cell, much like Danae was locked, but she was tortured daily by Dirce. Eventually she escapes and flees to the mountains to find her twins. Finding her twins, such as the story of Apollo and Artemis, they then retaliate and tie Dirce to a wild bull and drag her to death. They then go and kill Lycus and build the walls of Thebes, becoming its second founding, and rule in harmony thereafter. They, of course, then marry. Zethus marries Thebe, who is going to be who the city is named after, much like we have Athena and Athens. Amphion marries Niobe, the daughter of Tantalus, whose 14 children were killed by Apollo and Artemis, and of course their family being cursed thereafter because they blasphemed a goddess. The two stories we have just been going through are tied together here when Polydorus is going to marry Nyctius, and they in turn have Labdacus, who is going to beget Laius, who marries Jocasta, the descendant of the Sparti, and this will all come together here shortly. The story of Oedipus thus begins, as his father, Laius, is told by the oracle that his son will kill him, just as we have talked about with Kronos and Zeus. Thus terrified, he avoids sex with his wife until finally one night he gets so drunk that they consummate. Obviously, a child is produced, but he orders this child to be exposed to die by pinning its feet together and leaving it exposed in the wilderness. Now, the idea of pinning one's feet together was quite common practice because you didn't want someone whom you killed to come after you. And so we find many corpses bound like this from antiquity. So this keeps the ghost from walking after you. So he gives the child to a shepherd, who then takes it out to be exposed. The shepherd takes pity on this young child and gives it instead to Polybus, the king of Corinth, whose wife is childless. Merope then raises this child as her own and names it Oedipus, literally the swollen foot, for his feet were bound together to die. When Oedipus is grown, he goes to the Delphic oracle to discover his origin, as he was always teased as an adopted child, and/or said that he was adopted. The oracle informs him that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, Oedipus believes this means he's going to kill Polybus and marry Merope. So he vows never again to return to Corinth, instead heading east towards Thebes, again bringing these stories together. On the road to Thebes, he is ran off by a chariot. Enraged by this act, he kills the driver and the attendant. Only a shepherd who witnesses it survives. At this time, Thebes is in turmoil when he arrives, because the Sphinx, the daughter of Typhus, as we discussed, perches on top of a nearby hill and devours the townspeople one after another if they could not answer her riddle. And remember that the Sphinx is going to be the inverse of the Egyptian version, to where it has a female head and breasts with wings and then the body of a lion. Here we find it's a very popular motif in ancient Greece and in the early modern era, as they're going to find this creature that kills people and has this riddle perched on top of a mountain or a column, with Oedipus nearby answering the riddle. Creon, Laius's brother-in-law, heard that the king had been killed by bandits on the road to Delphi to ask the oracle what to do about the Sphinx. So he decreed that whoever solved the riddle of the Sphinx would free the city and could then marry the queen, becoming king himself. As the story goes, Oedipus hears this, arrives at the Sphinx, and listens to the riddle, which goes, "What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at midday, and 3 in the evening?" No one else could answer this riddle, but immediately Oedipus knew the answer and said, "A man." Enraged, the Sphinx threw herself from a cliff and dashed on the rocks below, for he had figured out that early in life we crawl on all fours, we walk on two legs in adulthood, and then we have a cane walking on three in the evening or later in life. He then marries the queen as he is king, and they have children. Their daughters, Antigone and Ismene, as well as sons, Polynices and Eteocles. Now, in Sophocles' Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex of 430 BCE, we have the most famous play from antiquity telling us what happens to this tragedy and the story of Oedipus. In the confusion of the Sphinx, no one discovered Laius's murder, and so, according to Sophocles, his ghost brought miasma, this blood pollution and vengeance on the city. Oedipus summons the blind seer Tiresias, who explains the truth that he, in fact, is the son of the king that he has killed, Laius, and married his mother, Jocasta. He does not believe it, of course, until a messenger arrives to tell Oedipus that his father, Polybus, has died, and he can succeed the throne of Corinth. This means he did not, in fact, kill his father, but he will not return to Corinth for the fear of marrying his mother. The messenger points out to him that he is not, in fact, the son of Polybus, as he was the messenger who gave him as a foundling to raise with the royal couple. They then call the shepherd, who was the only survivor of the massacre at the crossroads where he killed Laius. This was the same shepherd who delivered Oedipus as an infant to the king, thus confirming the story told by Tiresias. Jocasta, the mother of Oedipus and his wife, the queen now, realizes the truth and what she has done, and she is horrified. She runs to their marriage bed, where, of course, their children were produced. She locks the door and hangs herself. Oedipus finds her dead body and then takes the pins from her robe, and as the story goes, quote, plunge them in his eyes. Never will these eyes ever watch me doing or suffering what I have done or suffered, he says. This is one of the tragic turning points and the most important part of the story, according to Aristotle. He begs to be sent into exile, led by his daughter, and thus this part of the story ends. According to Aristotle, Oedipus the King is the perfect tragedy where two essential elements for an excellent plot come together at the exact same moment. An agnoresis, or recognition, happens, that being the identity of someone is revealed, at the same time as a peripetia, that being a turning around, where the fortunes are going to turn from good to bad of the character, realizing who they are, realizing he has married his mother and killed his father. Therefore, we find he is shown led out of the city, everyone disgusted at what has happened. He, of course, is going to engage in incest, and his children the product of incest. The last play written by Sophocles is about the end of Oedipus's life, where the seven are marching to Thebes as the blind old man of Oedipus is exiled with his daughter in a suburb of Athens, Colonus. It is there that he is approached by those wishing to possess his bones, for the Delphic oracle declares that any city possessing them would be unconquerable. So Creon and Polynices both appear to abduct him in order to win the battle, but Theseus, the king of Athens, orders them to leave, and Oedipus thus curses the sons of Creon and Polynices. Here we're going to see that he is cursing them, telling them to go away. And so he disappears after blessing his daughters, and he leaves into the forest, forever becoming an invisible spirit in the groves of Colonus, protecting Athens against its enemies. The seven arrive at the seven-gated Thebes, with seven heroes on either side, divided evenly at each gate, and the battle begins. According to Aeschylus in his Seven Against Thebes play, Tiresias informs the Thebans that they could win if Creon's son was sacrificed to Ares, and he does so willingly, killing himself outside of the gates. The brothers, as was fated and predicted by their father, then kill each other. Adrastus is the only one fated to escape in his chariot drawn by the magical horse Arion, produced by Poseidon and Demeter. In Sophocles' play Antigone, the best known play after Oedipus the king, Creon, now king after the battle, casts out the corpses to rot. No one is to give them a proper burial on pain of death. Antigone, however, is determined to bury Polynices, because of course it is her duty as a woman. Thus she insists her first duty is to family, while the duty to her state comes far behind that. She is caught trying to give him a proper burial and dragged before Creon, who condemns her to death, being buried alive in a cave. Tiresias the seer warns the king to release her, which he does, but then finds Antigone has hanged herself, and Haemon, his son who was engaged to marry Antigone, is enraged in this homicidal fashion and then commits suicide himself. Returning to the palace, he finds that the wife has also killed herself, and so it is a tragic ending to this story. It represents the struggle between masculine duty to the state above family and the feminine duty to the family to take care of one's dead. They're the only ones that can properly prepare the dead for burial and cleanse themselves of miasma as part of it. We turn now from a tragedy to a heroic quest with Jason and the Argonauts, of which there have been several popular films and TV shows and video games based off of. The story of Jason and the Argonauts begins in Thessaly, the widest plain in Greece and the northernmost archaic outpost of the Greeks. It is the birthplace of Achilles and the Bronze-Age city of Iolcus. This is where Jason and the Argonauts are going to find the generation that is going to exist right before the Trojan War. Apollonius of Rhodes is going to write in his Argonautica of the 3rd century BCE about the great exploits of Jason and the greatest heroes of antiquity going on a quest to find the Golden Fleece. We also find in this story is written about by Euripides in his play Medea. Here is a photograph of the plains in Thessaly, and is arguably the place where the great Titanomachy and other great battles took place, because it has many geographical and geological formations that tell us there was a massive earthquake and volcanic eruption that would have been understood as a great cosmic battle to the ancient Greeks. From the Aeolids are going to be descended Aeolus, which is the same as the story of Noah, who survives after the flood. So he is the great descendant and survivor, allowed to live as Zeus spares him. Athamas is the unluckiest man in Greek legend who becomes king, who marries Nephele. Their children, Phrixus and Hele, are going to be important for this story. Tired of her, that being Athamas was, he took on a second wife, Ino, the daughter of Cadmus of Thebes, and we all know what happens to her and her children as she's driven mad and kills them. Athamas and Ino have 2 sons, but Ino is jealous of Phrixus, fearing that the stepson might inherit the throne instead of her sons. This is going to repeat itself with Jason and Medea here soon as she kills her children. To destroy them, they are going to cause a crop failure, and so the messenger returns from Delphi with news, being bribed to report that Athamas must sacrifice his firstborn son Phrixus in this trickery deceit by Ino. Athamas is going to lead Phrixus to an altar with a knife in hand when the golden ram appeared beside the altar to spare him, to sacrifice the ram instead of his son, which of course is the same story as Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 22. So in this case, of course, an angel stays the hand of Abraham. So the story is tied here to this golden ram, which is going to possess magical powers with its fleece. He sacrificed the golden ram to Zeus instead and gives the pelt to Aeetes, who hangs it from an oak tree in a grove of Ares with a dragon protecting it, born of the blood of Typhus. Phrixus is then given Aeetes' daughter to marry. Salmoneus, the brother of Athamas, had a daughter, Tyro, the grandmother of Jason, who is going to give birth to Peleus. Now, he drives out his brother, keeping his half-brother Aeson imprisoned, and takes a wife, fathering daughters. But Aeson has a son, Jason, who he sends to Chiron to be educated and to hide, much like we find that Apollo sends his son to the centaurs to teach them medicine. The oracle prophesied that Peleus would be killed by a man with one sandal. So, grown and matured, Jason returns to Iolcus and is determined to claim his throne. He is carrying an old woman across a river whom he does not know is Hera when he loses his sandal. Hera then decides that Jason would be a better ruler than Peleus, and thus is going to destroy through the sorceress Medea. Peleus hears of a one-sandaled man who comes to confront him and says, "What would you do if you knew someone was going to kill you, someone over whom you had power?" Thus, of course, Jason responds, "Why, I'd send him to recover the golden fleece," much as the impossible task we hear Perseus was given to get the head of Medusa. In order to accomplish this impossible task, Jason summoned Argus, who constructs the largest ship ever to hold 50 men in total, which was, of course, a lot at that time. Athena inserted her magic as a speaking beam into this ship, and it was christened the Argo after the builder and gives the Argonauts their name. We find that Jason then summons the best fighting men from the Greek world, all of which we've been discussing, including Heracles, Orpheus, the Dioscuri, who are the sons of the seven we discussed, Castor and Pollux, the great twin boxers, the Boreads, Zetes and Calais, Telamon, who is the father of Ajax, the second greatest warrior to fight in the Trojan War, Peleus, Achilles' father, and Meleager, Deianira's brother, and of course Deianira will be the second wife of Heracles, as well as a seer. Of course, you need warriors, but also a seer, a prophet, someone who can help you on the trip, and that's Idmon, who sees that all of them will return, but one. This is much like assembling the greatest superheroes together that we have today, such as films like The Expendables or The Avengers. The voyage is traced throughout the known world, much like all of Greek myth happens in real places that can be identified. So they move throughout the entire Mediterranean, through, of course, Turkey, modern-day Turkey, over to northern Iraq. The first land that they come across is going to be Manlis, the island of Limnos, where the Limnians had killed their husbands a year earlier. Thus, the sex-starved women are going to spend 1 year with the men to replenish their population. Once this happens, they then return to their quest. Next, they land on the Doliones, where King Cyzicus is going to welcome them, for an oracle tells him to be kind to strangers. But once they had left, a headwind blew them right back. In the night, the inhabitants attacked the Argonauts, and only at dawn was it revealed that there were dead Doliones everywhere, and that the oracle had been correct in telling them to be kind to visitors. This is where, in showing off, Heracles breaks an oar, requiring them to stop for more wood. Heracles' boyfriend at the time, Hylas, is going to go and look for water off the coast of Mysa. There, the lustful water nymphs pulls him into the spring, drowning him. The next morning, the Argonauts left without both of them, as Heracles was distraught, losing his lover. Zetes and Calais are winged, they can fly, and so they insisted to go on without Heracles. So Heracles later returns and kills both of them because of this. They set ashore another land ruled by Amycus, who challenged them by passerby to box, and they always won. But in this instance, Polydeuces, or Pollux as he is known, the twin of Castor, is not big or strong, but he dodges a killer blow by Amycus and slips behind him, crushing his bones into his brain, dropping him dead. So Castor and Pollux are known as great boxers as part of the heroic Argonauts. Here, remember that boxing, otherwise known as pugilism in the ancient world, is one of the Olympic sports. And so obviously the Argonauts, as one of the heroes, would be very proficient in this form of combat. Next, the Argonauts are going to land on King Phineus, who had abused his gift of prophecy given by Apollo. Now, Apollo curses him by sending harpies, or snatchers, to punish him, as they would swoop down from the sky and steal his food, so he was starving. He says that if the Argonauts would help him, then they would give them the future course, or he would provide the future course of where they need to go next, where the Argo should sail next. Zetes and Calais are going to be the winged sons of the north wind, so they baited a trap for these harpies and pursued them through the sky when they arrived. This, of course, comes up in many different films as well in various ways, such as Jason and the Argonauts. Having successfully repelled the harpies, having two heroes on their team who could fly, the king, grateful now, who is a prophet, tells them exactly where they need to go, right, after slaying them. In an important chapter of the Argonauts' adventures, next they land on Aea, the city of King Aeetes, who Medea is going to be his daughter, who is an agent of Hera, persuading Aphrodite to send Eros to prick Medea in order to fall in love with Jason. The oracle warns Aeetes that a foreigner would be his undoing, and so he must make an example of them. He would let him take the fleece, that being the golden fleece they were sent to receive and bring back, if he would yoke two fire-breathing, bronze-hoofed bulls together and plowed the ground and sowed the dragon's teeth left over from Cadmus's kill at Thebes. Also, he would destroy the armed warriors who would spring up from the teeth. Medea gives him magic ointment to spread on his sword, shield, and body on the condition that he would marry her. He agrees, much like we find Theseus agrees to marry Ariadne, and he then survives the ordeal fighting these warriors that spring up from the ground, much like in the original movie Jason and the Argonauts. The plan to kill Jason thus fails, and Aeetes decides to destroy all the Greeks at once. Medea leads Jason to the fleece to put the protective dragon to sleep with her magic potion protecting him. They snatch the fleece and run back to the Argo, the ship, being chased by King Aeetes. The fleet caught up with them and demanded Medea surrender, for Jason had not had intercourse with her yet, and so their marriage was not consummated. So they quickly married and went into a cave and consummated the relationship, so they could no longer attack them. The Argonauts are back on course, but a wave throws them into the middle of the desert, where they find the Garden of the Hesperides, even though it is the wrong place from the other myth. At this time, the nymphs are weeping over the snake Ladon, who Heracles had killed in an earlier quest. The Argonauts must then carry the ship, since there's no water in the desert, to Lake Tritonus and row around aimlessly until Triton, the son of Poseidon, guides them back to the Mediterranean. At that point, the Argo heads to Crete. There, they're going to encounter Tullus, who throws boulders at the ship, this bronze giant left by Zeus to protect Europa, who was pregnant with King Minos. He has a single vein of ichor, or the blood of the gods, that is replenished through a hole in his ankle. As in the movie, Medea is going to fix the giant with the evil eye so he could strike his ankle with a rock and dislodge the plug. Thus he stumbles and falls off a cliff, being drained of this life-giving ichor. The giant bronze warrior here, and this robot, as we would understand it, is going to be very popular and comes up in other stories as well. At this point of the story, the Argo returns to the port where it began in the Gulf of Pegasus. This is going to reflect the real exploration of the Greeks in the Bronze Age of these various areas. And so they're turning their own exploits into myth here. In Eoclus, we find that there is a rumor the Argo had sunk. Peleus boasts that he is the first to escape fate, having not died, finishing off his half-brother Jason's father. Jason's mother curses the king and then kills herself. Thus, we find that she also kills Jason's younger brother as well. Jason returned after 4 months, but the king would not give up the throne. Medea then used their daughters to kill him. She explained to his daughters that she could make an old man young again by cutting him up into pieces and boiling him. She demonstrated it by taking an old ram, cutting it up and cooking it, and out popped a young ram. Believing this, his daughters chopped up their father Peleus, and Medea cooked him, but only a gluey stew was the result. Thus, of course, we find that they claim they left out an important ingredient and blamed the daughters for his death. The murderer, of course, is going to outrage the Eoloclans, who drive Jason and the foreigner, his wife Medea, away because of this transgression. The couple goes to Corinth and lived happily for a while. Medea bears Jason 2 sons, but at this time Jason wants to remarry. We hear about this story in Euripides, in his Medea, the play about this woman's scorn. So here, written at the time of the first year of the Peloponnesian War, we have these bitter emotions that are going to be shown in the breakup of a marriage in a monogamous society, also reflected in the breakup of Greek civilization as the Greek city-states go to war with one another. Medea sends Jason's new wife Clauce a wedding gift that is poisonous at this time. She then kills her 2 sons and then throws them into a dragon chariot, a gift from their grandfather Helios, and leaves the city for Athens. Aegeus, Theseus's father, promises to receive her, and we know where the story goes from here. Old and distraught, Jason sits below his ship, now an altar to Poseidon. At this time the prow breaks and falls on his head, killing him. Not dying gloriously in battle, but just as Aegeus and Theseus before him, dies as part of an accident tragically. Medea never pays for her crimes, interestingly enough. She escapes to Athens, then to Colchis, with her new son by Aegeus, Metis, who is going to kill Aeetes, taking his power, becoming the king of the Persians. We now turn to the myth of Meleager, which is going to come from the Argonauts, one of the heroes that joins them. In this myth, that is a minor one but very famous, we see it repeated all throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. As it goes, when he was born, the fates promised he would be handsome and brave, but one pointed to the fireplace and stated that when that log is consumed, the child will die. Althea took the log and hid it. He did in fact grow up handsome and join the Argonauts. Years before, Aeneas, Meleager's father, offended Artemis, who took revenge by sending a boar to terrorize Callion. It would tear up crops, uprooting trees, and kill any passerby. Many of the Argonauts joined in the Caledonian boar hunt, as it became known, a very famous side deed here. As part of their entourage, the famous female athlete Atalanta is going to come from Arcadia to join them. As her father wanted boys and exposed her to die at birth, a she-bear found her and she was raised by hunters. Thus, of course, she learned how to fight. Now, many objected to a woman joining the hunt. Jason turned away from the Argo, for instance, but Meleager was infatuated with her. Atalanta drew first blood in the boar hunt, but Meleager killed it. He gave the pelt to her because he wished to sleep with her. His uncles protested and snatched it from her, but he killed them as they tried to steal this prize. Upon hearing that her brothers were killed, his mother took the log that she knew would kill him, threw it on the fire, and he died. Then once again she committed suicide along with Meleager's wife. In the underworld, Meleager tells Heracles to marry Deianira. Following this boar hunt, we have the myth of Atalanta and Hippomenes, the last we will discuss today. Upon returning to her father's house, Atalanta is going to find that her father wants her to marry someone, but she was determined to remain a virgin and a hunter like Artemis. The story goes she would agree to marry whoever could overtake her or beat her in a foot race. Whenever the suitor would lose, she would chop off his head and hang it from a staff. The method for winning was that she would let the suitor get a head start, come up from behind them, and skewer them in the back with her spear, thus cheating. Aphrodite gets involved because she favors Hippomenes and gives him a golden apple of the Hesperides. Now, in this race, he drops it so that she would stop to pick it up, allowing him to win. In art, we see this as a man winning a race, dropping an apple that the woman cannot resist, stopping to pick up. Thus, of course, she is forced to marry at this point. They could not contain the lust for one another, as he had beat her, and she did not believe any man could. So they raced to a nearby shrine of Zeus and enjoyed sex for the first time. Now, this was a forbidden and sacred place, and you could not defile a temple by performing sexual intercourse. And that is why we find Medusa is also cursed for doing the same thing in Athena's temple. For this transgression, Zeus transforms them into lions. And according to Greek folklore, lions can only mate with leopards, but never other lions. They actually believed that these were two different species, that lions, male and female, had manes, and that leopards did not. So in their eyes, they could never mate again. The next class, we will continue with the next generation that follows that of the Argonauts with the Trojan War.